So turn 8 is now in the books for Global War 36. We're on to the July 1940 turn now, turn number 9. So turn 8 had quite a bit of a slowdown compared to all the conflict from turn number 7. Not nearly as much action. So the Germans, for instance, they spent their money on 5 medium armor, 5 self-propelled artillery, and a couple of light tanks. So, and all that has been placed in factories closer to Poland. So possibly a future Eastern Front there. And the Russians didn't fail to take notice of that. Other than that, Germany just kind of maneuvered some units around. So they have substantial ground units in Germany itself, more than enough to repel any invasion if the British wanted to come back onto the continent anytime soon. So that probably isn't going to happen. The Germans collecting $45 plus their bonuses, so they're up to over $50 a turn. Technologies, they got 2 of their 5 rolls, tech rolls, so they're up to stage 3 for 3 different technologies. So not too bad for Germany. Russia went ahead and took the 2 Polish territories that border the Soviet Union. That is part of their sphere of influence from the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They also took Latvia. So Lithuania is the only Baltic state still left for the Russians to occupy. They spent their money on several light tanks and some more self-propelled artillery themselves. So Russia's actually looking pretty good right now with their die roll. They're up to $31 plus bonuses. So, and it's several turns away at least from a possible conflict with Germany, giving Russia plenty of time to build up some forces. And now with the July 40 turn coming up now, they're able to build medium armor. So they can start catching up to the Germans in that regard as well. As far as the British, they went ahead, brought a couple of transports over, and sent some ships up to protect them. So now the British can move these 4 infantry that are in London around. They also bought 3 fighters they placed in London and a miner factory that they added down to the South African Union. So that's 2 miner factories. You can't upgrade a miner to a medium or a major outside of your home country. So I'm taking that to mean the actual, in the case of Great Britain, the territories here that comprise Britain itself. So couldn't upgrade the miner that was already here to a medium. So they bought a second miner. They can now place 2 units down there per turn. They also went ahead, finished off what was left of the Italian fleet in Sea Zone 80. So now they now have a battleship, a light carrier, 2 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, and a destroyer, and the Italian Navy is no more. So the Italians basically got as much as they could out of it, and the Navy is now sitting at the bottom of the Med. The British also brought some planes down, so they've got a heavy bomber, a medium bomber, and a couple fighters in Gibraltar. So they needed to get some units down here into the Med to combat what the Italians got going on. The U.S., they finished off a carrier and a heavy cruiser, and then purchased a fighter and a tactical bomber they placed on the new carrier. And that was it for the U.S. The U.S. up to $44. So now they have passed the income threshold that they can start sending some ships into the Pacific Ocean, which is what they will be doing here. This fleet down here off of Panama will be sailing over to the Pacific on this next turn. That was about it for the U.S. As far as the Italians, they did go ahead and they went into Egypt. They took Cairo, so they now have possession of the Suez Canal. They brought a cavalry down here, took a couple of Italian or British territories that weren't worth any IPP. They also sent their air force after participating in the battle in Cairo. They landed them here in Sicily. So that's 4 fighters and 3 tactical bombers. So the Italians still have a nice air force. They also saved most of their money. So with the income they generated this turn, which with bonuses was $15, they'll have nearly $30 to spend the next turn. So Italy's not in too bad a shape. Transjordan is open to occupation, so Italy can possibly start getting into the Middle East now as well. No British land units except for a couple of militia in southern Africa left on the continent, although these 2 minor factories will start producing units for the British. And then again, they brought significant air assets down into the Med, but that's still behind what the Italian Air Force has off of Sicily there. The Germans also, going back to them for a second, they weren't in a position to align any of these countries in the Balkans, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria. They didn't have any units that could reach. So once Paris falls, they're able to align those 3 nations, 1 per turn. So now the Germans are in position coming up here on turn 9, so they'll take Romania first. That's worth the most IPP. So that'll be good. That'll boost all those forces, a significant boost for the Germans on possibly the southern section of a future Eastern Front. And then also they're in position with some tanks that can reach from southern Germany into Yugoslavia. So you could see on this next turn, Yugoslavia be assaulted and Romania be aligned to the Germans. In the Pacific, a little bit of good news for the Japanese. Things looked really bad for them at the end of turn 7. They bounced back a little bit. They took a couple more islands down here in the Pacific. So they expelled the Far East Command from Sarawak. They also took Celebes, and they came over here to New Guinea. So that all those territories were a bump up at $1 a piece. They also used the majority of their naval assets. There was a sea battle here in 132. If you remember, at the end of turn 7, the Far East Command had a significant fleet there. The Japanese were able to take all of those Far East Command ships out. And then also here in Sea Zone 125, there was a naval battle with the 2 Anzac ships, a destroyer and a cruiser, and the Japanese were able to take out both of them. So if we look at the South Pacific right now, there's no Allied ships in the South Pacific. The Japanese don't have a great amount of naval presence. They got a couple of heavy cruisers and a battle cruiser here, a destroyer and a transport here, and then a heavy cruiser, light cruiser, and a light carrier here. Again, Anzac and the Far East Command have basically been wiped out of the South Pacific. So that was the good news. Japan also had to, they brought a transport, dropped 2 men off in Siam, and 2 of their fighters flew to Siam because the Far East Command has built up some infantry here in British Malaya. Not a significant force, but there was only a single Japanese militia in Siam prior to those forces being moved in. So Far East Command probably would have moved into Siam if Japan hadn't moved those forces down there. The Japanese also continued a little bit of a push into China. They took this northern territory off of the National Chinese. They got a carrier placed on the board and landed a fighter and a tactical on there, and then moved 2 battleships and a fleet carrier up another spot on the production chart. And they also bought a light tank that they put in Jahi up there. So altogether, not too bad for Japan, although now that the U.S. can start bringing their fleet from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that will be more than a match for the current naval units the Japanese have. And even in China, they made a little bit of headway, but if you look here, both the Communist Chinese and the National Chinese have huge stacks of infantry, more than what the Japanese have. So I'm not even sure. Wouldn't be surprised to see the Japanese lose this territory here and then be kind of pushed further back to their original territories in China itself. And Japan did bump up their income a little bit, but they're only collecting $29 a turn. So, and with the U.S. presence being felt more and more in the Pacific coming up here, Japan really has to concentrate on building some ships, as their navy's been, severely degraded these last couple turns, which means that they won't really have the money to place into China. So it's almost like, even though we're only 2 turns into the Japanese invasion of China, it's almost like a regret already that Japan even went in there at all. They were probably better off just sitting back and spending resources on some other stuff. So we'll see how that plays out for Japan. As far as the Far East Command, they bought a tactical and a fighter. What little naval assets they have left retreated out of the way of the Japanese. Anzac also bought a fighter this turn. The U.S. and Russia stayed pat here in the Pacific. And then for the Chinese, both the National and the Communist Chinese didn't do anything this turn. Neither side felt that they could successfully engage the other, especially when you factor in the mountain terrain. Each side just has infantry. The Communist Chinese also have 1 cavalry as well, but it's mostly just infantry on infantry. So when you're attacking into a territory that already has significant infantry assets and they have the mountain defense, your infantry is only attacking at 1 initially. So neither side went on the offensive there. They just kind of built up their forces. But now we could see them possibly going after Japan here on turn number 9. So that's where things stand for now. We'll see how things look after turn 9 is complete.